Hello, my name is Kathleen. Welcome to my home. Let's jump into this mixing bowl and I'm going to show you the one formula I use to create a magic dough that then goes on to be the base of several different recipes. It requires no stand mixer, only 5 ingredients, and no measuring. Let's get started. It's one formula to rule them all. I just got back from the gym. I have washed my hands. They are impeccably clean. If you're nervous for the first time, I'm gonna leave a loose recipe down in the description box for you to follow as a guideline, but walk through it with me. I promise you'll be fine. This has no lines. It doesn't tell me how much it is. If I were to do maybe a cup, I know how much dough that would make me because I've done this so many times. If I maybe wanted more leftovers, I could go maybe a cup and a half. If I'm making this for my family and for guests, I could go for 2 cups. The crux of it is you get to decide. So let's start with a cup-ish, because this isn't measuring. If I'm cooking this right after I've done dishes and the tap water is warm, that's warm enough. But because this is a little cold, I'm gonna stick it in the microwave for just a little bit and warm it up, because that's gonna help activate it. All right, my water is warm and it's going in the bowl. And then from there, you can see I've laid out the other ingredients for you. Sugar, salt, oil, any form of leavening, and then my flour. And here begins the magic. This is water. However, if you wanted to, you could use warm milk. You could use a mixture of warm milk or even yogurt. Yogurt's quite common in pita and naan and makes for a really rich dough. People will even crack in an egg if they want it to be a little bit more rich. This is the base recipe, the cheapest recipe, and the easiest. So that's what I'm showing you today, but whenever you've mastered it, feel free to experiment. So long as you get the final texture right, the world's your oyster. Now, once we have our liquid in the bowl, whatever you choose, we need a little bit of sweetener. This could be honey. In my case, I'm just using white sugar. You could even do brown sugar if you want a little bit more of that rich molasses taste. I have these tiny spoons from my Indian masala lava in most of my canisters for quick measuring, but I could just use the well of my hand or shake it in or use a spoon. Whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable with. And remember, there's a recipe in the description box if you'd rather. So for my sweetener, this is what's gonna help the leavening rise. I'm just gonna dump some in. Let's say maybe a tablespoon. It could be as much as 2 tablespoons. You get to pick. If you want a more savory dough, perhaps you're kneading some cheese into the dough, stick with a little bit. If you want it to be a bit richer, because maybe you're making cinnamon rolls, you can use a little more. Now, personally, I did cinnamon rolls just this last weekend. I only did water, I didn't bother with the milk, and I didn't even use that much sugar because I knew once I rolled it out, had the butter spread out, I was gonna add quite a bit of sugar to the top of the dough before rolling. So I didn't feel the need to put it in the dough. I just did enough to help it to rise. Now from there, we're gonna add salt. This adds a great flavor. I'm gonna make a well in my hand. Don't worry, I'll come to the screen. Remember, my hands are clean. And I would say that's probably a teaspoon, but maybe a teaspoon and a half. But a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons is fine. There's a range, a wide range, which is why this recipe is so easy for beginners and those not wanting to measure. Maybe your measuring spoons are dirty, or maybe you're cooking with a disability, or maybe you're teaching your child and you don't want to overly complicate it. But let's add our salt. Sprinkle that right in. Now I'm going to use this fat. You could use melted coconut oil, melted butter, olive oil, maybe if you're making more of a focaccia style dough. I'm just gonna keep it simple and do a splash of canola oil. This again could be anywhere from a tablespoon to a 1/4 cup, which is 4 tablespoons. I wanna say 4. I'll put it on the screen. So let's put in a splash of our oil, but remember, you could choose any fat you like. You could easily cut back on this. There's my little splash of oil. I don't like using a lot personally. I am gonna grease down the bowl and the dough here in just a second. Again, you're welcome to add more. It's quite an easy recipe. Can't mess it up. Now here is the leavening. There was a time when I was on a budget and using a tablespoon of this was just too expensive. So I would mix this recipe up the night before or the morning if I was using it in the evening, and I would use a 1/4 teaspoon. That is very little yeast. Look how little yeast that is. That would make this jar last so long. Even use 1/8 teaspoon if it had plenty of time to rise. Now, if you're on a budget, feel free to make your own starter, and you could do something like pain au levain, which is more of the French style sourdough. This is active sourdough starter. I fed it yesterday. I would add probably half of this into the water right now as is, and then that is free yeast. Just add a little bit of flour and water back in here, mix it. I just loosely cover it and set it back on the counter, and it's going to continue to grow, and then I'll still have more for my next recipe. But because I want this to be ready a little faster so I can show you how I would knead it and form it, I'm going to go ahead and add yeast. Again, I'm adding more because I want it to be done faster, but you've seen how little you can get away with. Again, like the oil, it's a wide range. You cannot mess this recipe up. So I'm just going to go straight into the well of my hand. I'm going to guess and say that's a tablespoon. Straight into the water. Now come look in the mixing bowl and see what I see. We are going to give that just a loose mixture. The yeast dissolves. The sugar is still kind of at the bottom. That's no problem. You'll notice I'm just using a fork. That's intentional. Because this is a no-knead recipe, the mixer is not necessary. The fork is just to loosely mix the ingredients, and then I'll finish with my impeccably clean hands. If you are nervous about accidentally dumping in too much dough, pull out your cup measure and use it instead. There will be a guideline recipe in the description if you're more comfortable with that. But this is where the magic happens, so let me dump in my flour. You can see I've added my flour, and I'm going to give that a mix, and I'll show you the final consistency. I'm kind of scraping the sides to get all the flour down. And then I'm going to clean off my fork, set that in the sink, and take off my ring. And now from here, I'm not going to knead, I'm just going to form this into a ball. If it's a little bit too wet, I can add a little flour. If it's a little too dry, I can add a splash of water. Don't overly complicate it. This felt just a wee bit sticky on the palm of my hand, so I'm adding just a tiny sprinkle of flour. All right, that was maybe 30 seconds of kneading, less than a minute for sure. It's come together as a nice soft dough. And I'm going to put just a splash of oil here in the bowl so that my dough doesn't stick and comes out easily. You could even just use spray oil if that's easier. Give it a twirl. Flip it over. Give it a twirl. Now that my dough is coated, it won't dry out. Let me wash my hands, and I'm going to show you the last step. Using that same jar or cup measure, I've thrown some water in it, and I'm going to stick this in the microwave until it boils. This will build up steam in a nice, insulated, cozy environment and give my dough the perfect place to rise. I feel like we should clean that microwave. Were there fingerprints on there? Tell me you didn't see it. Lie to me. All right. I am so close to 200 subscribers. Would you please join my family and stop by my home more often? I have several more frugal, fun, minimal recipes to share with you. All right, my water's boiling. Let's add the dough. It's done. It's just going to sit there. That warm, moist environment is the perfect place for this yeasted dough to rise. It works great for sourdough as well. Sourdough does take a longer time to rise. Don't worry about all the folding you see online. If you used your sourdough starter in this dough, the rest of the recipe is the same. Leave it in your microwave just a little longer than you would yeast. In the same way, if you used 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon of the yeast, and that would need longer to rise, it's the same with your sourdough starter. My birthday this year fell on a Friday, so on Saturday morning, since everyone was home and didn't have school or work, I took this exact dough, rolled it out, softened some butter in the microwave and spread it over top, and then sprinkled sugar and cinnamon. I tried the new hack of using a pizza cutter to cut long strips and then rolling my cinnamon rolls individually versus rolling the whole log and cutting. It worked a treat. You've got to try it. And sadly, my oven is broken, so everything I've been cooking has been going in the air fryer. I took my cinnamon rolls after they had risen and set them in the air fryer. I think I did about 6 at a time. Left some room in between because air fryers are all about airflow, and then let it cook. They turned out delicious and my kids raved about them. It cost me pennies, it used way less sugar and oil in the dough itself, so then I didn't feel bad about using the butter and sugar in the rolling, and it made for a great breakfast treat. Once this dough has risen and is nice and soft, if you wanted, say, English muffins, spray down your counter with a little bit of oil, pour that soft, pillowy dough straight down onto the countertop, and then use your biscuit cutter to cut out rounds. And with that sticky, oily dough, pat both sides in cornmeal. Stick it in a heated cast iron skillet with a lid. Cook one side, flip it, and then add a splash of water and place the lid back on. That steamy environment is what allows English muffins to get that particular texture on the outside that's almost bagel-like, while still being incredibly light and airy and fluffy, and having that crispy top with the cornmeal. Once it's nice and pillowy soft, roll it into thick rounds and leave it on the counter for a second rise. And then take your little pita rounds into an incredibly hot oven, 450 degrees preheated. And 4 at a time, put them on your cookie sheet and stick them in the oven. You could even do this at 475 degrees. Pita loves a hot environment. Stick it in with the oven light on so you can keep an eye on it on the other side and let it completely cook. It's gonna puff up and turn into soft pita pockets. I've used this same recipe for it, but if you wanted to use milk or yogurt to enrich your dough, you could do that as well. This formula can be modified however you desire. Once this dough is ready to go, you could roll it out into 2 pizzas worth of dough. And of course, this dough could be used to make simple dinner rolls. I like to pinch off a round of dough and then roll the insides and tuck the bottom. Leave it for a short time for a second rise and then stick it in the oven. If I'm cooking in the oven, I can use a container and let the sides touch. Again, if you're cooking it in the air fryer, leave some space in between. We've used this same recipe to make hamburger buns. I make them a little bit bigger, squish them slightly so that they're more wide versus high, and then do an egg wash in the last moment and sprinkle on sesame seeds. It makes a soft, fluffy hamburger bun for pennies. Again, once this dough is pillowy and soft, pour it into a dish with a generous drizzle of oil. Get it nice and oiled on one side, flip your dough and get it nice and oiled again. Olive oil works great for this. Add some flaky sea salt and some rosemary, and then start poking that dough, creating those nooks and crannies with the oil, the salt, and the herbs, and make your own focaccia. I've even seen people add olives and cloves of garlic. Oh, doesn't that sound delicious with some homemade spaghetti? This is my bread tin. I would take that dough, grease my tin, and then loosely roll it into a log shape, tucking the bottom in and laying it in my pan for its second rise. If you wanted, you could spritz the top with oil before baking. Or do an egg wash, though be careful with that because a loaf of bread this size takes a little longer to bake and the egg wash might overly brown it. If you wanted to turn it into cinnamon raisin bread, simply pour your dough out onto the counter or stretch it out in your bowl, sprinkle sugar, cinnamon, and some raisins, and then roll your bread into that log shape. I've done this in the bowl so that I'm only cleaning one dish and don't get my counter messy, and it works a treat. Stick it in and bake just as I directed with the loaf of bread. Pizza dough, naan, pita, hamburger buns, hot dog buns, focaccia, sourdough rolls, dinner rolls, sandwich bread, cinnamon raisin bread, The list goes on. If you have a Dutch oven, this could be a great opportunity to make more of a rustic style dough. If you wanted that sourdough taste, use your sourdough starter and give it more time to rise. But either way, you can do it with the same recipe. I personally like doing this method when I would use a 1/4 or an 1/8 teaspoon of yeast and then left it overnight to rise. Place your Dutch oven inside of your oven and get it nice and hot, even the lid of the cast iron. And then remove that piping hot Dutch oven out, place it on your stove, and turn that dough straight out onto a piece of parchment paper. Lift the edge of the parchment paper and place it into your Dutch oven and add the lid. Cook it half of the baking time, I would say 30 to 40 minutes with the lid on, and then remove the lid at the end so you can get that nice crispy, crunchy top. This rustic bread is incredible with soups. Now that this puppy is in there rising, I'm gonna go get my son from preschool, and then we'll come back and make a treat for my children's after school snack. This bread has doubled in size, so I am going to turn part of it into dinner rolls and part of it into cinnamon rolls as an afternoon snack for my kids, and then let it do its second rise while I take a quick shower. These are just for my kids, so I'm not gonna make them very big.
Look, the kite stopped too.
How cute!
How will we get it out?
I'm gonna go ahead and make a third ball, and what I'm gonna use that for is demonstrate our naan. Again, this is all using the exact same dough. On this same dough, I have crushed some garlic, added some chopped cilantro, a sprinkle of salt, and rolled it out. I'm gonna let this rise and then place it in my hot skillet. And you can see back here I have my cinnamon rolls rising, as well as my dinner rolls. All from the same batch of bread, just to give you an example of how versatile this is. And the garlic will have a lovely flavor. Who would have thought that this one base formula could be used in all 3 of those recipes? That's the magic of this dough. It's one formula to rule them all.